Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA oddsmaker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by our new sponsor, BetDSI. We'd like to thank Five Dime Sportsbook for supporting us the last several years. They were great. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 221 event, which takes place in Perth, Australia. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, we lost 1 unit for UFC Fight Night 125 after going 0-1 on our premium bets. We also won our 1 unit free bet on Valentina Shevchenko inside the distance prop. Back to the present, UFC 211 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the fight card on Fight Pass is a welterweight contest between Luke Jumo, who is 12-4, and Daichi Abe, who is 6-0. Now, Nick, where did the odds open for this bout, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Now, the official openers, there were 3 different spots that we covered on MMAOddsBreaker.com, so make sure you check out the full UFC 221 opening odds, where we actually feature Europe lines, the offshore betting market, their openers as well, and along with Vegas. So we'll be quoting some of those lines. So make sure, again, you check out the UFC 221 article. But the Abe line opened minus 130 for Abe, the comeback on Jumo at plus 105. And right now, looking over our sponsored sportsbook, BetDSI, currently at BetDSI, it's Abe minus 150 and Jumo is plus 120. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, of course, as they always do. And now we're seeing, a little bit more action coming in Abe's way. And of course, he is the more popular fighter. I mean, Jumo is definitely a talented fighter, so people do know him. They do respect him as well. And what you have here is a striker versus striker matchup. There's no question about that. Both these guys like to stand and bang. Both of these guys have the ability to fight on the ground a little bit, but a lot of times they'll use, the stuff, the takedowns, and you'll use the wrestling. That's not bad, a little bit underrated probably by both parties, but they'll use it defensively to try to keep the fight upright so they can stand and bang. And that's what they like to do. Both these guys also like to counter strike, let their opponent show a little bit of aggression and pick them apart as well. So it's going to be interesting to see who takes the lead. It's probably going to be Abe here. He is a little bit more aggressive than Jumo. Jumo does seem to counter a little bit more accurate, and he is, I think, out of the two, the better counter striker, if you would say. But this is going to be a war. This is going to be a fun fight. Both these guys, like I said, like to stand and bang. I don't think we're going to see this play out on the ground all that much at all. So it's going to really be whose chin holds up, whose activity level is a little bit higher, and who the judges like that is dictating the pace here as well. So I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Abe in this fight. I do not like him defensively here, though, in that spot a little bit. He does kind of tend to hold his chin a little bit too high for my liking. His hand's a little low as well. I think Jumo is a little bit better defensively in that regard, but I do like what I see from Abe, and I think his aggression and his power probably is going to be the difference maker here in this fight. So it is a dog or pass situation, though. I think it's very hard, especially at minus 150, to lay the chalk on Abe right now, but I do pick him to win. I think he is a little bit ahead of the game right now, and I think he has a brighter future as well on the UFC roster, especially if he takes another step and gets this win here over Jumo. But it's not going to be easy. Jumo's going to be game, and this is going to be a good fight. So the pick officially is Abe to win.
This fight should be pretty competitive. I mean, Luke Jumo is a talented striker, and so is Daichi Abe. So in a fight like this, I don't expect either guy to go to the ground. It's going to come out the guy that's going to win is going to be whoever is more aggressive, whoever lands the bigger shots, and then whoever potentially can score a knockout. Both have power. Both are pretty accurate with their striking. Abe is the more active striker, so I expect him to be throwing more. I expect him to be moving forward a little bit more. Jumo, on the other hand, he's a bit more stationary, and he tends to let his opponent dictate the pace of the fight because he is looking for opportunities to land counter strikes. He has decent kicking game, and Jumo does have some powerful left and right hands that he can sit down on and throw his counters. So Abe is going to have to be a little cautious if he's being overly aggressive, because he could walk right into something heavy. And Abe did eat some big shots by Hyunju Lim in the second round of his fight against Lim in his UFC debut. I mean, Abe was actually on his way to potentially losing that fight before knocking Lim down in the final 20 seconds and really bloodying him up. That basically sealed it. I mean, he had lost the second round. The third was close. It could have gone either way. And then he stole it right there at the end. So, Abe is definitely beatable. That being said, Abe's young at 26 years old. He's still undefeated at 6-0, and he has a lot of room for growth. So, he is a fighter that is worth being a little bit excited about. Jumo, on the other hand, it seems like when he's been tested throughout his career, he has not really passed those tests. I mean, earlier in his career, he went on a 2-fight losing skid when he faced current UFC fighters that are actually on this card, Li Jinglong and Jake Matthews. And then while he did win his UFC debut, he got outworked by Shinzo Enzai in his last bout, and he got taken down a little bit in that fight. He ate some shots on the feet by a guy who is not as good of a striker as him. So that is a bit of a concern. Especially with Abe being a more powerful version of Anzai and a more accurate and technical version. So really how this fight's going to boil down is it's in Australia, so the New Zealander, I would think, has the home field edge a little bit. Not much, because Japan, same hemisphere area. But Abe is going to be the more aggressive and active striker. But with Jumo looking for counters, there are going to be counter opportunities. And Abe could eat some big shots. And his defense is not the greatest when he's being aggressive. Although Jumo's defense isn't that great either, because he tends to sit still without a lot of movement in the center of the cage. So I expect this to be an entertaining battle between two guys that are powerful strikers. And I'm slightly leaning Jumo, but I can totally see Abe pulling this out. But I'm going to pick Luke Jumo, and hopefully I don't look dumb. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Teruto Ishihara, who is 11-4-2, taking on Jose Quinones, who is 7-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
In Europe, Ishihara actually opened as a favorite, -125. I'm mentioning that because offshore, Quinones actually opened -180. So there's a discrepancy right there. And in Vegas, it was closer to Pick'em with Quinones as favorite as well. So lines all over the place for this fight. And I think I can understand why. I mean, this is kind of a head scratcher of a type of matchup. Of course, Ishihara is dropping down to bantamweight for the first time in his career. So it's going to be interesting to see how the weight cut goes for him and how, if he brings that power down with him without kind of losing anything, because that's part of his game for sure. Ishihara is definitely a very strong fighter, a powerful, aggressive striker at times, at least. I know the Lobov fight was definitely a disappointment for Ishihara, but outside of that, in most cases, he's looked pretty good. The people that have been able to beat Ishihara, though, outside of that, are wrestlers like Gray Maynard, of course. I mean, getting all those takedowns against him and controlling him on the ground. And that's going to be Quinones' path to victory here as well. And I think that's why the early action did see Quinones as a bigger favorite and looked like offshore was a little bit more accurate as far as lines go at the time. Now we're starting to see it drop back down because Quinones at Bet DSI at the time of the recording is -169 plus 139. So the line is dropping back down again accordingly because the market price overall was a little bit higher, and I think we'll continue to see the price on Ishihara decrease as the fight gets closer as well. It's a tough one because, like I said, I think Quinones definitely is improving his game. He's putting the work in. I think the best attribute of his game is honestly getting those takedowns and getting people's backs and trying to work his submission game. And if he can do that against Ishihara, he's probably going to be successful and more than likely pull off a win. Now, Ishihara is not the easiest person to sub, but definitely out of anything, Ishihara's ground game is his weakness. And again, Quinones could definitely take advantage of that. On the feet, Quinones isn't bad, but I don't think he wants to deal with Ishihara's power at all. I think Ishihara definitely has a striking advantage in this fight. I think Quinones is going to be a little bit taller. I mean, they're pretty close in height, but the southpaw and the unorthodox striking that Ishihara has and the bombs that he throws, tailored into Quinones, he does have some iffy striking defense at times as well. I think Ishihara is going to land, and he's going to probably have success doing so if he can keep the fight upright. And what I'm thinking here is a lot of people believe that Ishihara's takedown defense is so weak that Quinones is going to come in here, just run him over, get him to the ground, and then have his way with him. I don't think so. I think people are underrating Ishihara's takedown defense, honestly. I know Gray Maynard was able to take him down, and he's been taken down in other fights as well, but it's better than what it seems. And I think if you do get him down, his defense overall isn't bad, and he's able to scramble back up to the feet in most cases. And if that's the case here, he's going to have success against Quinones. So I do like Ishihara to pull off the upset, in my opinion here. I think that it's going to be a good fight. Realistically, again, you could see it going either way because it is a type of throwback fight in a way where Quinones is going to be the ground guy and Ishihara is going to be the striker here. So if the ground guy gets it down and is able to utilize his strengths, he's going to win his fight. If the striker is able to keep upright and utilize his strength, he's going to probably win his fight. So I'm leaning with Ishihara despite his questionable takedown defense in most cases that people would think. I think it's going to probably be okay here, and he's going to probably come away with the win. So it's a dog or pass situation, no doubt about it. I lean Ishihara. He's my official pick as well.
Yeah, the biggest thing happening here is Ishihara dropping down to the bantamweight division from featherweight, a division where he had pretty nasty knockout power. He had some violent finishes in the featherweight division. So if that can translate, he might be one of the most powerful, dangerous bantamweights on the UFC roster. That being said, Jose Quinones is on a nice little run here. He's won 3 straight. Granted, none of those victories are over guys that are, top bantamweight talents. They're pretty far down the bantamweight totem pole for Quinones getting those wins. And so Ishihara is by far the stiffest test Quinones has had since he lost the Ultimate Fighter Latin America to Alejandro Perez. So Ishihara, he has power, he's tough, and he's mildly athletic, but he also is a little wild, a little reckless, and he can be out-techniqued. You look at the Lobov fight for crying out loud. That's a guy that had not had a lot of success in the UFC, but Lobov was just by far the more technical striker, and he picked Ishihara apart in the featherweight division. So Quinones, while he's, not a top premier bantamweight talent, if he can stick to his technique and stick to the basics, he might be able to outwork Ishihara, but the best thing Quinones has going for him is his ground game and his wrestling. And as Nick mentioned, Ishihara has been taken down. Mizuta Hirota took him down a couple times. Gray Maynard took him down at least 10 times. So that is Quinones' best path to victory. It's the path of least resistance. He's not going to be eating a lot of punches if he has Ishihara on his back. He's playing with fire every second that this fight stays standing. Even though Quinones has shown a pretty good durability so far, Ishihara's power might just be too much anyway. So, that being said, Ishihara really has only been kept down by a national, elite All-American level wrestler in Maynard who is dropping down to the featherweight division from lightweight, and he was a big lightweight. So, I think Ishihara should be able to fend off Quinones' takedown attempts, and I think that his power will translate here, and I don't know if he'll knock Quinones out, but I definitely see him landing some big shots in this fight and making Quinones think twice, and maybe backing Quinones off a lot. So I think that Ishihara's aggression and pace and power should allow him to win a decision as long as he stays off of his back. So my pick is going to be Ishihara. Now headlining the Fight Pass prelims is a lightweight contest between Ross Pearson, who is 21-12 with 1 no contest, and Mizuta Hirota, who is 19-8-2. Now, Nick, where did the odds open for this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Pearson opened -180, the comeback on Hirota around +150 or so. And right now, looking over to DSI, it currently is Pearson -158, the comeback on Hirota at +128. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, and Hirota is getting some action across the board. It looks like it books. I do think that it's a fair, reasonable play to to think about Hirota in this spot. I mean, I know Pearson is going to get the respect more so from the overall MMA community, the betting community as well, because he's been kind of in the spotlight, especially in the U.S. more so. He's been in the UFC longer, obviously, than Hirota as well, and he's faced, who's who, obviously in the lightweight division, and he's fared well against most competitors. So Hirota, on the other hand, he made it over to the UFC late in his career, honestly. I mean, he's 36 years old right now, but he was obviously a star in Japan before that, and I was glad that he did eventually make it over, even if it was a little bit, I feel like a little bit later than most people would like, of course, because Hirota definitely was talented, especially when he was younger. I mean, with anybody, of course, when you're a little bit younger, you're going to be a little bit fresher, a little bit more athletic, a little bit more speed, and a little bit more power. But don't count that out here either, because both these guys still have enough power to make this interesting, and both these guys are strikers as well. So you have a classic striker versus striker matchup, even though these guys are, again, past what I think is their primes. They're still mentally capable of putting together a pretty decent game plan. And I mean, as far as experience level goes on both ends as well, they've never been better in that regard. But I think how it's going to play out here, both these guys have decent takedown defense, so I'm expecting this to probably stay up on the feet, and it'll go back and forth. I mean, if you want to give the slight edge to Pearson here, overall, because he's faced, like I said, the who's who, he's faced some tremendous strikers along the way, and he's been underrated many times, and he's actually come away making even the fights that he's lost a little bit closer at times against elite strikers. But then there's, certain occasions that he's been rocked, he's been wobbled, he's been, knocked out. I mean, against Dan Hooker, he's coming off obviously in his last fight, Pearson got, knocked out in that fight. And then what is kind of a head scratcher, and it's happened to him in the past. It's been a while now, but guys like Cole Miller were able to have some success in the stand-up game a little bit, against a guy like Pearson, then being able to rock him and then put him to sleep by sub there as well. So, I mean, in that regard, Pearson's always had a little bit of a suspect chin, but defensively, he's actually not that bad. So it's one of those things. If you can get through to Pearson's chin, you probably can have a little bit more success. And, he's vulnerable there for sure, but his defense in most cases holds up well enough that, it's tough to get to that point. So Hirota, though, I think is definitely a good enough striker that he can catch that chin. I think it's going to be very competitive. I think it'll be a very tight fight across the board here. I mean, both these guys are going to have their moments. So this is another dog or pass situation for me. Honestly, I think it's going to be a case where Hirota is probably not getting enough respect. But again, the line is dropping a little bit. It did open higher in some places, again, as I said. So there's been, variety of openers here as well. But I do believe that Hirota is probably going to sneak away with a win here. Now, again, it's going to be a tough fight. I wouldn't be surprised if it hits the scorecards. It's a split decision type of fight, but I do trust Hiroto's chin a little bit more at this point. I know he's been rocked as well, but I think his chin is going to hold a little bit more in this case than Pearson. So striker versus striker battle. I do like Hirota in this spot, just edging Pearson out, or maybe even possibly putting him out along the way. So my pick is the underdog here in Hirota.
And I'm going to come in the other way. Ross Pearson is on a 4-fight losing streak. That cannot be denied. But that being said, the guys that he's lost to have been pretty good fighters. And while Hirota has not had the best UFC run so far, I do think that, he's going to be another stiff test for Pearson, especially because Pearson clearly is at this point in a decline. And I don't know how many more fights he's going to have on the UFC roster, especially if he loses this one. This is almost certainly it for him. But, I think this is a winnable fight for Pearson. Pearson isn't the most active striker, but Hirota actually does land a slightly fewer strikes per minute. So accuracy, they're about the same. Honestly, the biggest difference between these two fighters is that Pearson actually has better defense, even though I think Pearson's chin is more vulnerable. The fact that he gets hit less often is a very important thing. So, if Pearson and Hirota are getting into a firefight, I think it's Hirota that's going to be getting hit more. Pearson will be scoring more with the judges, and potentially Pearson could put Hirota away, even though Hirota is, historically a very tough fighter. I don't think Hirota's power has translated much into the UFC, and Pearson, even though he doesn't have the greatest chin, he doesn't get knocked out that often. I mean, he did most recently get finished by Dan Hooker, but that was his only time being stopped by strikes in the last 3 years that he's been competing, even more than that, honestly. So I don't expect Hirota to land that big kill shot, and in a fight that I expect to be primarily stand up for 3 rounds, I think Pearson will just get a slightly better edge on accuracy, offense, you name it, just enough to win a decision. I don't think this will be a one-sided blowout either way, but I think Pearson will do enough to end that losing streak and get back on track. So my pick is going to be Russ Pearson. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims is a flyweight contest between Jusir Formiga, who is 20-5, and Ben Wen, who is 17-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Man, what a great fight. What an interesting fight as well. So the odds here, again, a little bit all over the place. Formiga in Europe opened -175. Offshore, Formiga actually opened a pick'em -115 either way. And then in Vegas, it was Formiga -125. Just so you can see, again, discrepancies in all 3 lines there as well. And right now at the time of the recording at BetDSI, it's currently -122 for Formiga. The comeback on win is -108. So basically a pick'em with a slight lean towards Formiga here still. It's a tough one because I think a lot of people are banking on Formiga's ground game to come through here for him against Win. And it's very possible because Formiga's one of those fighters that, man, I mean, he's a blanket. If he doesn't get you to the ground and submit you, he's going to get you to the ground and at least control it because he's, so good at what he does, and his game has improved. Even his striking has improved, man. I mean, the guy is a grappling-based fighter, a special grappler. I mean, a world-class jiu-jitsu artist, as we all know, but he's actually improved his stand-up game. He has a little bit of power on the feet now as well. He's got a little bit more confidence in that way. So it's going to be interesting. You cannot count Formiga out in any aspect of the game now, but make no mistake here. I mean, he doesn't want to stand and bang with Win. Win will, I think, light him up on the feet here in this spot. Might even finish him on the feet. Formiga's a tough guy to knock out, but I think Win is definitely capable of doing so if the fight plays out on the feet too long. So it's going to get interesting for Formiga. He's going to have to get this fight down. He's going to probably have to take Win's back and try to work that submission. I don't think it's going to be very easy. Win actually has a pretty solid submission game in his own right. Not on the level of Formiga though, especially offensively or defensively, obviously. But I'm saying Win's defense isn't too bad. But positional control, I think he's going to lose that battle even if they start scrambling around. Formiga is going to probably have the advantage there. So he needs to stuff the takedowns, make sure he keeps Formiga off his back. And if he does that, he's going to be able to pick Formiga apart and get a quality win and continue to move up the ladder. I think he's capable of doing so. I really am intrigued by seeing Win continue to move up the ladder because if he gets a title shot, regardless, man, I mean, even if he's, obviously he's probably going to be fighting Demetrius Johnson if that's the case. That's an interesting fight. I mean, Demetrius Johnson has faced all comers and has done some really good things, but I think Win presents some problems for anybody in the weight class, including Demetrius Johnson. He's just a dangerous opponent. So that would be interesting. I would love to see that fight. But before that, he obviously has to get through Formiga, and then we'll see what happens after that. And this is not going to be an easy spot for Win to get through, but it's a good test. And if he passes it, he deserves to keep on moving up the ladder. I think he's going to get it done here. I think he can at least pick Formiga apart to win on the cards. If not, maybe stop him on the way. So it's one of those situations here. He needs to keep Formiga off his back. He needs to fight smart here. And his conditioning at times is also a question mark. But I think what we've seen lately from Win is a little bit more accurate. I think he's going to be disciplined. His conditioning is going to be okay. And of course, this is a quality scalp for him. And I think he's going to be up for the challenge. So my pick is Win to beat Formiga.
Even though both of these fighters are well-rounded, I mean, Formiga is an extremely talented grappler that has added some overall decent striking to his game. I mean, he actually outstruck Wilson Hayes primarily to win that fight. Ben Wen is a very talented and powerful striker that has a very strong grappling game, being the only guy to finish Tim Elliott on the ground. That being said, striking is definitely his forte, and he has had his issues in the past on the ground, most notably in the Luis Smolka fight when he lost some scrambles, eventually getting really beat up and just taking a pounding from bottom position. So in this battle, even though both of these guys are well-rounded and are capable in all areas, to me it still is a bit of a grappler against a striker. If Formiga gets this to the floor, while I don't see him pounding Wen out, because that's never really been a big, strong part of his game, he's always been more positionally focused on the ground, either looking for submissions or just trying to get to a dominant position. So I don't see that happening, but I could see him controlling Wen on the ground. And then on the feet, I can see Wen knocking Formiga out. While Formiga has made some improvements, I mean, when he faces good, powerful strikers, he usually can take a beating on the feet against those guys. And I think Wen is capable of dishing one out. So to me, this fight entirely boils down to where this fight takes place and who can kind of control where the fight takes place. Formiga doesn't have that great of takedown accuracy at 36%. Wen does have pretty good takedown defense. Granted, he hasn't faced a lot of really strong wrestlers thus far, although when he did, he was able to get like a quick submission, like against Elliott. So the quick submission is not going to happen against Formiga. I do not see Formiga diving for a takedown into a guillotine choke or something. So if this goes to the ground, I think Formiga wins scrambles and takes Wen's back and then just is on him like a backpack for the next 5 minutes. So Wen needs to avoid that like the plague. If he can keep it upright, I think Wen is going to be in really good shape. I think, Wen is going to have the hometown support, being that he, even though he's from the United States, he has fought a lot in Australia. So he is going to have, a lot of crowd support, and I think that that'll really help him. And, Formiga, to me, he seems more, I don't ever really see him being a title challenger, even though at one point he was the best flyweight in the world. To me, he's always going to be kind of that title shot gatekeeper. He's the guy that you have to beat if you want to take on Demetrius Johnson. I mean, we've seen Ray Borg do it. We've seen, Henry Cejudo do it. We've seen, Joseph Benavidez do it. We've seen John Dodson do it, I believe. So those are the guys that have been able to handle Formiga and get those title shots. And I think that Ben Wen can do it too. If it goes to the floor, I'm nervous, absolutely, but I think Wen can keep it upright. I think Formiga's chin is a bit questionable, and Wen has the power to crack it and potentially put him away. So my pick is going to be Ben Wen. Now, moving up to the featherweight division, we have Alexander Volkanovski, who is 16-1, taking on Jeremy Kennedy, who is 11-0. Now, Nick, where did the odds open for this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Volkanovski opened minus 210 to come back on Kennedy, plus 170. So right now, looking over at BetDSI, it is currently Volkanovski minus 195 to come back on Kennedy, plus 155. Line margins have tightened up a little bit as well. Some dog action coming in towards Kennedy. This is a tough fight. I mean, both these guys are what people would consider prospects. Obviously, at age 29, Volkanovski, it's at that point where do you really consider him a prospect or not? But I'm saying, and UFC-wise and fight years, everything like that, yeah, he's definitely still a prospect level. Kennedy, of course, age 25, he's a true prospect. He's climbing up that ladder. He's looked pretty good thus far in the UFC as well. Both these guys have had their moments for sure. But stylistically, this is an interesting fight because what you have Kennedy, who is definitely the grinder, the grappling-based fighter that's improving his stand-up, but he definitely, out of the grappling or striking department, his striking needs a lot more work than his grappling does. So he's a great grinder. He's able to, most of the time, to utilize his strengths to get the fight to the ground. And once he has you on the ground, he has his way with you as well. So that's going to be the interesting part here. Can he get Volkanovski on his back, and can he control Volkanovski? Because as we all know, Volkanovski obviously has a heck of a grappling game in his own right. He's a grinder, very strong wrestling. He's able to get most people down, as well. But on the feet, he definitely has a big advantage over Kennedy here in this spot. Now, he's going to be a little bit shorter, but the reach, I believe, is actually about the same. So that makes things interesting. Kennedy just a little bit taller, of course, as well. I believe actually like 4 inches, 5 inches or so for Kennedy's, but the true reach is about the same. So on the feet, Volkanovski, I think, is going to do some damage. He's going to be able to probably pick Kennedy apart, and Kennedy's not going to like it too much. He's going to want to get this fight to the ground as much as he can. It's going to be interesting to see if we see Kennedy fighting off his back in this spot here as well, because again, Volkanovski has really good grappling. So this is going to be, I think, a grinding fight, a grueling fight for both guys. It's one I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Volkanovski because I do think that, again, I think he's a little bit more complete, and it's going to come down to him being the better striker. But at the same time, I think there's a good chance Kennedy actually outgrinds Volkanovski as the fight progresses. So it wouldn't be a surprise at all if you see Volkanovski coming out winning the first round and then maybe possibly losing the next two to Kennedy as Kennedy starts gaining control of this fight. So it's another tough one, and I do think it's a dog or pass situation as well. But I'm going to pick Volkanovski because, again, I just think he has a slight edge here. And, of course, the hype, the popularity. I mean, a lot of people believe that at this weight class, Volkanovski's a future title contender, and he very well could be, especially with a win over a grinder like Kennedy would take him one step further as well. So we'll see how it plays out. I'm going to slightly lean towards Volkanovski here, but man, I wouldn't lay the chalk in this spot because I think Kennedy's a sleeper and he might get the job done here. So a tricky fight to pick and bet. So be cautious out there if you are playing this fight. But my pick is going to be, for right now, it's going to be Volkanovski. Now, again, a disclaimer we always throw out there. Our official picks are going to be posted on MMAOddsBreaker.com staff picks, so make sure you look at that article. It usually comes out on fight day. That's going to be our official picks, but for right now, I'm leaning Volkanovski to win.
And I agree. This is a winnable fight for Volkanovski. It's a fight he should win. He is by far the better and more active and aggressive striker than Kennedy. So in a battle between two ground-focused fighters, sometimes you have a sloppy stand-up fight. And if that happens, I think Volkanovski wins running away. Now, if this fight does go to the floor, Volkanovski has been impressive with his ability to get fighters on their back, get top position, and grind them out. And that's kind of been Kennedy's method to victory as well. So we're going to learn a lot about how good their wrestling is if this does turn into a wrestling fight, because I'm expecting some wild scrambles. I'm expecting both guys to be shooting in for takedowns, trying to time takedowns. So that could be really interesting. But if Kennedy is able to win some of those scrambles, what he doesn't have is the fact that Volkanovski can always fall back on the stand-up. Even though Volkanovski's not like an elite striker, he should be the better striker here, and he should make Kennedy fight on his back foot because Volkanovski is aggressive with just about everything he does. He's not the most devastating finisher, but he does just wear people down, and he fights at a very high pace. Volkanovski lands more than 2 strikes a minute, more than twice as many strikes per minute as Kennedy does. He's more accurate. He's a better defensive fighter as well. So I just think that this is a very good opportunity for Volkanovski to show up and put on a signature performance. The main thing I'm concerned about, as Nick mentioned, though, is if Kennedy can get his takedowns going. We haven't seen a lot of Volkanovski off of his back. So if he's put there and kept there, that could completely turn this fight on its head. But I think Volkanovski is strong enough to be able to get up if Kennedy does get some takedowns. And then I think that he can make Kennedy tire himself out trying to get takedowns and then punish him on the feet. So my pick is going to be Volkanovski. Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Rob Wilkinson, who is 11-1, taking on Israel Adesanya, who is 11-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Adesanya opened minus 280, the comeback on Wilkinson plus 240. Looking over at BetDSI right now, there has been more action on Adesanya. It's minus 348, the comeback on Wilkinson at plus 268. So again, the hype, the potential of Adesanya, I mean, a lot of people are definitely taking notice. The guy is an elite striker. He is a blue belt in jiu-jitsu as well under Andre Galvao, so you have to respect that. I mean, he's definitely improving his ground game in that regard, but overall, he's a glory kickboxing veteran. He's got some pure boxing experience as well. And of course, he's working on his, overall takedown defense and his ground game as well, but that's still a weakness in his game compared to his striking. I mean, he's an elite striker. He utilizes his reach well, which he typically has over most opponents. Here, though, it's interesting. He probably won't over Wilkinson. I believe they have the same listed reach, so it's going to be interesting. But that being said, Adesanya is a special striker that can pick you apart. He keeps his distance well. He's accurate in his striking game. He can beat you with his hands. He can beat you with his kicks. I mean, he's just a nasty striker, and he has success doing so. Accurate with power, with great technique. So that's what you're getting out of him. And again, as far as the takedown game goes, he's not the easiest guy to get to the floor. And once you do, he does have some pretty nice whizzers. He definitely is able to scramble upright, quickly as well. So he's been working on that game again and improving. So Wilkinson's going to have his hands full because he's not your typical striker. He has okay power on the feet at times, but he's the type of guy that would rather get the fight to the floor and utilize his strength, which is the ground. I mean, he's a grinder. He's capable of subbing people once he gets you on the ground as well. And that's what he's going to look to do here. I mean, it's a no-brainer, like I said, because I mean, this is your typical grappler versus striker matchup. Wilkinson is not going to want to stand and bang with Adesanya. So, it is what it is. I think that it's going to be intriguing because where the line is right now, I think people have to be cautious. I wouldn't be laying a striker against a guy that's going to come in looking to take you down and test your ground game. Even though Wilkinson, got beaten his UFC debut that he did take on short notice, by the way. I still think that he's a problem here for Adesanya if he's not careful. So I'm going to pick Adesanya though. I think that he is the better fighter. He's got a higher ceiling, and if he could keep this fight upright, he's going to have his way with Wilkinson for sure. So stylistically, I think they're probably bringing him in at the right time and testing him against a very solid guy in Wilkinson. But again, do not lay the chalk. Don't lay 3.5 to 1 or whatever the price, like I said, will be at your sports book, because I think you're risking way too much. Let's see how Adesanya's takedown defense does hold up against somebody that's actually going to be persistent in getting him to the floor. And if he passes, then we see that he's on his way to brighter things for sure in the UFC. So I'm going to pick Adesanya. I like what I see from him. I hope he does have success in the UFC. It's nice to see an elite level glory kickboxer coming into the UFC again. I mean, we've seen that, recently as well. So I think that trend will continue. We're going to see some crossover back and forth between glory and the UFC. And I like it. I think it's pretty cool to see. So, we'll see how it plays out, but Adesanya is my pick, but definitely got to be cautious over Wilkinson's ground game here.
Watching Adesanya fight, I mean, it is just a treat. I mean, this guy is an elite striker coming from an extremely accomplished glory kickboxing striking background. This guy has the range, the technique, the speed, the power. I mean, he has all the tools to be one of the best strikers in the UFC. It's just all going to boil down to how good he is at keeping fights upright. Because on the ground, that's always going to be a vulnerability of an elite striker. I mean, we've seen it already. There was a very talented Russian fighter who came from a traditional Chinese striking art, and he made his UFC debut. We hyped him up. He got taken down. He got submitted. So that is the big concern here. Adesanya, massacred some fighters, but I mean, he really hasn't been tested by somebody that has a decent ground game. Like his biggest win is Melvin Gillard, who's a blown up lightweight. And yeah, he looked awesome in that fight and even showcased some decent takedown defense and was able to get some sweeps and transition into mount and was kind of attacking Gillard's back a little bit. But I mean, he still showcased even in that fight that his ground game has a ways to go. So I'm a little concerned here. I mean, Rob Wilkinson is not the most athletic guy, but he is capable of getting fights to the floor. And when he does get them to the floor, he's pretty dangerous there. I mean, in his UFC debut, he was a little hesitant against Sayar Bahadurzada. Wilkinson did get a quick takedown at one point, but Bahadurzada got right back up. And then Wilkinson was unable to get the fight back to the floor despite repeated clinch attempts and repeated takedown attempts along the fence. And then eventually Bahadurzada just cracked him with a couple combinations and was able to finish him. If Wilkinson cannot get this fight to the floor, Adesanya is going to do horrible, horrific things that will be on UFC highlight reels for a long time. It's just all going to boil down to how long Wilkinson's willing to engage on the feet and how quickly and how effectively he can get this fight to the floor. Because if he cannot do it, this is going to be a very easy Adesanya victory. I don't think Wilkinson even stands the smallest chance in hell on the feet against Adesanya. At least against Bahadurzada, Wilkinson, being with that Bahadurzada typically is a welterweight, Wilkinson at least had a bit of a size advantage. He was able to throw some kicks and some jabs. He's not even going to be able to do that against Adesanya. So what he needs to do is just shoot in and just hope he can get this to the floor, because if he doesn't, it's going to be over. So that's basically how this fight boils down to. And I'm going to side with Adesanya. I mean, Wilkinson really did not impress me that much, but he might surprise me given a full training camp and a full game plan. And the fact that Adesanya is so untested on the ground, it would not shock me in the least bit if Wilkinson did get him down and, pull off the upset. But I'm going to side with the favorite here. I mean, Adesanya's striking is just so much fun to watch, and I'm hoping that we get to see a very impressive display on Saturday. So my pick is going to be Adesanya. Now dropping down to the lightweight division for the preliminary card headliner, we have Damian Brown, who is 17-11, taking on Dong Hyung Maestro Kim, who is 15-8-3. Now, Nick, what were the opening odds for this bout, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Another interesting fight here for sure. Brown in Europe opened -122, even money on Kim. Offshore, it was Kim that actually opened -145, Brown at +115. And in Vegas, it was actually Kim -145 +125 for Brown as well. So Vegas offshore kind of agreed. Europe went the other way with it. And it's an intriguing fight for sure. I mean, both of these guys have had their moments and have had decent performances in the UFC. And then they've had performances that they'd, probably take back and have a redo at as well. So these guys are not future title contenders, to say the least, at 155 pounds. But what they are very solid outs that are aggressive at times and capable of finishing their opponents, capable of outgrinding their opponents as well, capable of submitting their opponents. So these guys are definitely well-rounded fighters. They just really, like I said, I mean, as far as their potential goes, I think what you're basically seeing it. They're more gatekeepers than anything else. If you're able to beat these guys and have a win, you're probably on the right path. But outside of that, it's going to be an interesting matchup. It's going to be a close matchup as well. I mean, both these guys do like to stand and strike as well. I think both of them are going to try to attempt to get the fight to the ground. So it's a little case of similar clash of styles that we'll see who utilizes what better. And I think in this case, it's going to be Kim that's just slightly ahead of Brown. I know that Brown's had his moments on the ground as well, but he's actually been out grappled. I think Kim's takedown defense is probably going to hold up a little bit better than Brown's, and I think Kim's going to end up getting top position if they do end up hitting the floor as well. So on the feet, I do favor Kim as well, slightly. I think he's a little bit more of the danger striker. I trust his chin a little bit more as well. I mean, both these guys have been knocked out in the past a couple times, and they've been rocked in other fights as well. But I think if this becomes a slugfest right now, from what I've seen from Kim, I do trust him a little bit more in that regard. And again, I think Kim probably ends up winning the ground battle along the way as well. So Brown is a very game opponent. Wouldn't be shocked if he does pull this off. I mean, it's going to be a very close competitive fight. So, I mean, it's virtually a pick-em type of fight with a slight lean towards Kim. I think it's about right. And I'm going to pick Kim myself. I think that he's probably going to come away with a win here. And I do think he's just a little bit better than Brown overall right now. And I think it's going to probably show up in this fight as well. So the pick is Kim to get the win here over Brown.
Brown put on a very good performance in his last fight, which won Fight of the Night against Frank Camacho. That being said, he got destroyed by Vince Pichel before that. And even in the Camacho loss, I mean, he did get outstruck 150-100. So, he still eats a lot of shots. I mean, he absorbs 5 strikes per minute, but only lands 3.8. That's not good. That being said, Dong Hyun Kim's about the same. I mean, he absorbs 5 and lands about 3.5. So, I mean, for this fight, I expect it's going to be a bit of a slugfest on the feet. It should be entertaining, though. Both guys can throw down. Both guys have a little bit of power. Neither guy is particularly durable. And on the ground, Brown has decent takedowns, but not much else with his ground game. And Kim has pretty good takedowns and a little bit of a submission game. So I think these guys are evenly matched. But I'm actually slightly leaning Dong Hyun Kim. I mean, he's got a little bit of momentum behind him now on his mini win streak. And I've been liking what I've been seeing out of him. I mean, he's showcased some improvements in his technique on the feet and some big improvements on his ground skills. If he gets suckered into a brawl, that's probably to his detriment because while Brown lost the last crazy brawl he was in, so did Kim when he had his fight of the night battle. So I think it's to Brown's benefit to try to turn this fight into a bit of a sloppy mess and just see where it goes. And if Kim can keep it a little bit more composed, it's to his benefit. So I'm slightly leaning Kim. I think that he just has a little bit better overall tools in his fight skills. And I think that he can outwork Brown both standing and on the ground. Although I'll definitely be concerned if this does turn into a bit of a barn burner. But my pick is going to be Kim. Now moving on to the main card, we have a light heavyweight contest kicking things off between Tyson Pedro, who is 6-1, and Separbek Safarov, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Pedro opened minus 280, the comeback on Safarov plus 240. That was in Vegas. Offshore in Europe opened a little bit lower, like around 2.5 to 1 or so. So ballpark to where the current number is now as well, where you're seeing currently Pedro at minus 290. At DSI currently minus 275. Looking across the market price is about 270s, 280s out there. So again, ballpark to where Vegas opened. And right now at DSI minus 275, the comeback on Safarov is at plus 225. So it is an interesting fight because this is another case of grappler versus striker, in my opinion, where both guys are a little bit more well-rounded than that. But make no mistake here, Pedro wants to get Safarov on the ground and try to utilize his strength, which is his ground game, get top position, do some ground and pound, obviously, or try to look for submission over Safarov. Now, Safarov, of course, is going to want to stuff those takedowns. His aggression at times is crazy to deal with, and he's got some power to go along with it as well. And he's tough as nails. I mean, if you look at the fight that he had against Safarov's fight against Vellante, man, that was a crazy fight. I mean, he was getting hurt in that fight, but he was still dangerous along the way, and that's exactly what you get from him. So Pedro doesn't want to mess around too much on the feet. If so, he could be sleeping by the end of this fight for sure. So Pedro, again, needs to utilize that ground game. I think he probably does so in this matchup. I think Pedro's the type of kid, again, only age 26, and he's improving. He's getting more confidence. He's going to be one of those cases that has most of his fights in the UFC, which, against solid competition, as he progresses his UFC career here as well. So this is a winnable fight for him. I think he can, again, utilize his game plan, get Safarov to the ground, and probably do some damage there and probably finish the fight. So my pick is going to be Pedro. But if Pedro cannot get this fight to the floor, I think he's going to be in some trouble because Safarov's aggression and his power and his accuracy as well is going to cause Pedro some fits on the feet. So he's got to be cautious. But it should be Pedro's fight to win here. So the pick is Pedro.
And I'm siding with Pedro as well. I mean, basically this boils down to where this fight takes place. If it stays standing, Pedro's going to be in a bit of trouble. I mean, when he took on Khalil Roundtree, Pedro got dropped early in that fight and then eventually grabbed a takedown, passed his guard, got a first round submission. Pedro is not that great of a stand-up fighter. He's not that great when he's put on the defensive. So if this fight, against Ilir Latifi, Pedro got taken down 4 times, but that's not an issue here. So against Safarov, it's just all about not standing and engaging with Safarov. I mean, that's basically the only thing Safarov has is he's aggressive and he's powerful and he's tough. And as long as Pedro avoids getting into prolonged stand-up exchanges with Safarov, then Pedro should be able to drag this fight to the floor where he'll get top position, rain down ground and pound, and then either finish the fight with strikes or work for a submission. So as long as Pedro avoids the stand-up exchanges, he should be fine. Safarov, I don't think he has great takedown defense. We haven't seen anything in the UFC so far because John Vellante stood toe-to-toe with him for the whole fight. And even though Safarov was basically on one leg, he almost knocked out Vellante in the second round, despite having taken a beating. So he's always going to be dangerous when this fight is standing. But I think Pedro can get this to the floor. I think he can keep it there, and I think that he can finish it there. So my pick is going to be Pedro. Now dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Jake Matthews, who is 12-3, taking on Li Jingliang, who is 14-4. Now, Nick, where did the odds open for this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Jinglong opened minus 170. The comeback on Matthews around plus 130. Now looking over at DSI, it is currently Jinglong minus 156. The comeback on Matthews at plus 126. Now over in Europe, it did open a little bit higher. Jinglong opened minus 200. The comeback on Matthews around plus 160. So again, multiple lines out there, but under 2-1 with a slight lean towards Jinglong is basically the case here. I honestly think it's a little bit too high. I know a lot of people are going to probably scratch their heads at it because if you look at the two, I think Jinglong has been more impressive. I think he's been, facing solid competition, dangerous competition at times as well, and he's been coming away with the win. I mean, his ground game's improving, his takedown defense is solid, and his striking, he's got some knockout power that you have to respect. So Jinglong is definitely a threat, and he keeps on climbing that welterweight ladder, so he's not an easy out. And if he could keep the fight upright against Matthews, a lot of people believe he's going to have some serious success. And probably so. He'll do okay, but the point here is I think Matthews is getting underrated in a lot of ways. His fight against Velikovic, making his welterweight debut in the UFC, wasn't a bad one. Velikovic is a very tough out. He's not a small welterweight either to deal with. So I think a lot of people that believe Matthews might be a little bit undersized at welterweight obviously proved that wasn't the case. And on top of it, I think Matthews' striking is actually a bit underrated. And I think he's going to have some success on the feet against Jinglong as well. And if anybody gets this fight to the ground, I believe it is going to be Matthews getting the fight to the floor. And on the floor, he does have a better jiu-jitsu game, a better grinding style than Jinglong does as well. And I think he's going to have top position and probably look to finish on the ground as well. So I think Matthews has some advantages in this fight, believe it or not. So he has to respect the power of Jinglong, but I think if he doesn't get caught by anything crazy and get put out like Jinglong's been doing to most of his opponents, I think Matthews is going to be okay here and probably pull off the win. So I'm going to go against the grain in most cases. I'm going to pick Matthews to pull off the slight upset win here. I do believe he's getting underestimated, and this is a good spot for him to get a very solid win over a respected opponent in Jinglong. So I am impressed with what Jinglong's been doing. I just think it's going to come to an end in this fight against Matthews. So the pick is Matthews to get the W here.
Technique-wise, Matthews is the superior fighter to Li Jinglong. Matthews has better striking technique. He has better pure wrestling. I think he's got better submission skills. He's got better ground and pound. But he does have some deficiencies. Matthews' chin is not very good. I mean, you got to remember, he got rocked by Akbar Areola, of all people, back in his lightweight days. Now, maybe his chin is a little bit better moving up to welterweight. We'll see. He is a very young fighter. He's still just 23 years old. So I'm expecting... I was expecting at some point he was going to move to welterweight because he was a very big lightweight. So we'll see if this continues to translate and if his chin holds up a little bit better. And in terms of just pure power, Li Jinglong definitely is the more powerful striker. I mean, Jinglong has been getting into some crazy fights and picking up some just violent knockouts. It started with the Diego Lima knockout back in 2015, and then he followed it up by knocking out Anton Zafir, Bobby Nash, and most recently Zach Otto in the first round. So Jinglong has really turned the corner with his striking and his power. So he is always going to be very dangerous. If Matthews can get inside on him and put him on his back, then he could totally pull something off. I mean, Keita Nakamura had a lot of success with a little bit on the feet and then especially with the ground game, actually pulling off a third round submission against Jinglong. So I can see Matthews having success and winning this fight. There is clearly a path to victory for him, but I also just cannot ignore the power of Jinglong. Because, if Jinglong even hits a glancing blow on Matthews, I think that could be enough to put Matthews out of sorts and set up a potential finish. So I just don't know if Matthews can avoid Jinglong's power for 3 straight rounds. So I'm going to side with Jinglong. I think that at some point he does connect and hurt Matthews and either put him in a bad way and get himself in a position to win a decision, in an exciting back and forth scrap, or more than likely, Jinglong can hurt Matthews and set up a TKO finish. So my pick is going to be Jinglong, but again, I can totally see a path to victory for Matthews if he keeps things technical and protects his chin. Now moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Tai Tuivasa, who is 8-0, taking on Cyril Asker, who is 9-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Offshore, Tuivasa open minus 190. In Europe, Tuivasa open minus 300, and in Vegas, Tuivasa open minus 300 as well. So a little discrepancy there. And I think, obviously, where the current line is right now at DSI, that the Euro and Vegas market, we're obviously more accurate here, with Tuivasa being at minus 285 right now over at Bet DSI, and the comeback on Asker at plus 235. So line margins have tightened up a little bit, and about 3-1 I think is right here in this spot, because I think Tuivasa, man, talk about a prospect at 24 years old. Of course, we went into it in his debut, so check out the Oddscast for that, of course, to get a breakdown of his history a little bit more. I mean, with the rugby and all that we talked about, but he's an athlete, and he's been working hard on translating this MMA, his athleticism to MMA, and it's been working out really well. Of course, he trains with Mark Hunt, so he's got a vet he can lean on and get pointers from, and he just keep on improving. I mean, what a striker Hunt is, obviously. So Tuivasa's striking game is where it's at for him. I mean, that's what he is. He's a big guy, strong, powerful. He's a southpaw. And of course, I mean, a lot of times people will just fold under his pressure and his power. And I think that's probably going to be the case here with Asker. I think the UFC's matching Tuivasa up the proper way. They're slowly bringing him up because, again, as far as pure MMA experience, he's still a little raw. He's still young. He's only going to develop and get better. So a guy like Asker is a real test because Asker's no slouch. I mean, Asker is definitely a dangerous opponent. He's won a couple fights, obviously, in the UFC as well. So this is a good test for Tuivasa. Can he stuff Asker's takedowns? Asker has got a little bit of power in the feet as well, but I think how his path to victory here would be to get Tuivasa on the ground and try to, get him out, pound him out that way. But if it stays standing, and it probably will, because Tuivasa's takedown defense is actually pretty solid, I think Tuivasa is going to finish this fight probably in a highlight reel type of knockout. So I am going to pick Tuivasa. I think, again, he should be a solid favorite in this spot, despite him still being a little bit raw. I expect him to look even better than he did in his UFC debut and to continue to improve. So Tuivasa's the pick. I think he probably finishes Asker along the way.
To me, this is the most one-sided bout on the entire card. Now, I'm not saying that Tuivasa is the second coming in the heavyweight division, but Cyril Asker is just not a particularly threatening fighter. Asker beats the guys he's supposed to beat, the Dmitry Smolyakovs and Hu Yaozongs of the world, basically the bottom tier UFC heavyweights, but he's not much more above them. Whenever he's faced somebody that had power and could defend a takedown, Asker doesn't just lose, he gets destroyed. I mean, Walt Harris smashed him, Jared Cannonier smashed him, and I think Tai Tuivasa smashes him. Asker is respectable on the feet, nothing impressive, but he is not that athletic. He doesn't have a very good chin. And Tuivasa is athletic, powerful, explosive. He can do some things, even though he's carrying around a bit of a gut and he's, he doesn't look like the most athletic guy. I mean, he comes from a very athletic background, being a former, rugby player or, in the Australia scene. And I think that Tuivasa can really do some damage as he works his way up the heavyweight division. I mean, I think he'll have some trouble against the top guys, but against somebody like Cyril Asker, I expect Tuivasa doesn't just win, but I think that he absolutely obliterates Asker, whether it's a flying knee or a spinning attack or a head kick or just, giving him those hands. I think at some point Cyril Asker goes down and probably in the first round. So Tuivasa is absolutely my pick. I think this is probably the most lopsided fight on the card. Now, sticking with the heavyweight division, we have Mark Hunt, who is 13-11-1 with 1 no contest, taking on Curtis Blades, who is 8-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where were the odds open for this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
In Europe, it was minus 175 for Blades, plus 140 for Hunt. Offshore is a little bit lower at about I believe. Oh, actually, it was minus 120, if I'm not mistaken. The line originally came out. So it was about a pick 'em exactly, minus 120 either way offshore. And then, of course, in Vegas, it was around minus 160. So discrepancies again, but a slight lean towards Blades in most cases. And the betting action from the pick 'em offshore did drive the line up. And it is currently sitting at minus 165 over at BetDSI. And the comeback on Hunt is at plus 135. So again, more action coming in Blades' way. And at first glance, you look at this and you're thinking to yourself, let me see. Hunt's had struggles with wrestlers in the past. If you look, obviously the current champion, Stipe Miocic, he was able to utilize a good game plan, get Hunt down and just brutalize him on the ground. Hunt was amazing, his toughness in that fight that he displayed, because he took him a while for the champion to finish him there. But that being said, also against Brock Lesnar was able to take Hunt down and control that fight and win a decision against him as well. So Blades is that type of mold, that type of background that he has with the wrestling. And of course, he's got some stand-up to go along with it as well. But you don't want to bang with Mark Hunt on the feet too long. You want to get this guy to the ground if you're capable of doing so and try to finish him. Work your submission game, work your ground and pound, work your positional control, and try to squeak out a win this way. Because if Hunt stays standing with most heavyweights, he's very dangerous and he can knock you out. Of course, we've learned that time and time again. Even at age 43, you don't want to mess around with Hunt's power. So Blades has to be smart here, utilize a good game plan. I don't know if he's going to be able to do it. And what stands out to me the most is Blades' win over O'Millanchuk. I mean, he got the job done. He was able to get the decision over O'Millanchuk in that fight, but at the same time, he struggled getting him to the floor. And in my opinion, Mark Hunt is a different level. I mean, I think he's obviously a level above O'Millanchuk in this spot as well. His takedown defense has gotten way better. It's improving. He's not the easiest guy to get down. So I think Blades might struggle getting this to the floor. Again, before the research, I thought, this is kind of a no-brainer. I like Blades a lot here in this spot because I think he will utilize the same game plan that Stipe had, but I don't think it's going to be that easy. I've always probably underestimated Stipe's wrestling, so it tells you how good his wrestling is. I'm not sure if Blades is on that level, honestly, as far as cage wrestling goes. So I don't think he's going to have the success that Stipe had or Brock Lesnar had in this spot either. So I think he's going to struggle getting the takedowns here in this spot, and I think Hunt is actually going to have some success and possibly get Blades out of there. So even though a lot of us would probably like to see Blades move up that ladder and get a solid win and get a new contender in the mix. And, hopefully he looks good doing so. I don't know. I think it's a tough spot for him. And I think Hunt's going to probably pull this one off so I'm going to pick the underdog here, Hunt. Again, after research, I think it's a way to go because his takedown defense has improved so much that I think he's going to probably be able to keep this thing upright and have success on the feet. Now, of course, what bothers me about Hunt, he is starting to get his chin starting to get declined a little bit. He might run into something like a knee or something of that nature or uppercut along the way as he's coming in. With Blades being the taller fighter, he's going to have obviously a decent reach advantage as well. So even though Blades doesn't have the striking advantage, I mean, at age 43 and the chin, kind of not getting any better, even though Hunt's had a pretty solid chin throughout his career, I realize that. But still, I think his better days are kind of behind him in that regard as well. And I think he's got to be cautious doing so because Blades has enough power on the feet that could cause definitely some noise there as well. So my pick is still going to be Hunt, though. I think he probably stuffs the takedowns, keeps his fight upright, and does some damage on the feet. So the pick is Mark Hunt to pull off the slight upset.
And while I agree that Mark Hunt can win this fight, there's some things I do have to disagree with. I'm really not worried about Mark Hunt on the feet against Curtis Blades. Blades really has not done anything in the stand-up against any fighter that has shown me that he's much of a threat in the stand-up portion. I mean, that's still definitely a developing part of his game. Blades is a good athlete with a strong wrestling background, but it's a very inconsistent wrestling background. It's almost frustrating. I mean, the O'Millanchuk fight is such an outlier that it's just impossible to ignore. I mean, 0 takedowns against a guy that did not have that great of takedown defense. Somebody that, was taken down and dominated by Alexei Olenek at times. O'Millanchuk historically has been taken down by Stefan Struve, Timothy Johnson, Alexei Olenek, like I mentioned, Anthony Hamilton, Jared Rockhold. I mean, I just don't get why Curtis Blades couldn't take him down. I mean, granted, he did end up outstriking O'Millanchuk, who actually is a decent striker, because O'Millanchuk was worried about the takedowns. But, I mean, even in outstriking O'Millanchuk, it did not really impress me. So what did impress me was Blades' performance against Alexei Olenek. I mean, he got 4 takedowns and then just was able to beat up on Olenek, eventually getting a second round doctor stoppage TKO. If Blades can get top position against Hunt, I can see him winning this fight absolutely. I mean, he can, like, his ground and pound is excellent, and his top position has the potential to be smothering. So I can see him winning rounds or potentially getting a TKO if it gets to the floor. But if it doesn't get to the floor, I think Mark Hunt can really pick apart Blades, just like he did against Derek Lewis. I mean, Derek Lewis is a big, physical guy that has a lot of power, but, I mean, his biggest threat was when he gets in top position on the ground, having really nasty ground and pound. And that he wasn't able to make that happen against Hunt, and Lewis ended up just getting beat up on the feet by a very diverse array of strikes from Hunt. I mean, he mixed it up, head, body, forced a big guy like Lewis to defend all different types of areas, and he just wasn't able to do it. So if Mark Hunt can put the pressure on Blades, stuff takedowns, keep this fight upright, and start getting settled in on the feet, I don't see how Blades could win. I mean, it really boils down to Blades getting takedowns. And if he can't take O'Mealenchuk down, I'm definitely concerned about him getting Mark Hunt down. It looks like Mark Hunt is in very good shape for this fight from everything I've seen. So I'm expecting Mark Hunt to be extremely motivated, trying to go on one last run in the heavyweight division. And at this point in Blades' career, being 26 years old and having a very bright future, this might be a little bit too much too soon for him. And I think Mark Hunt can pull this one out. So I'm going to side with Hunt. I don't know if he'll be able to get a knockout or anything, but I think he can outwork Curtis Blades over the course of 3 rounds to at least win a decision. So my pick is going to be Mark Hunt. Now, dropping down to the middleweight division for an interim UFC middleweight title bout, we have Yoel Romero, who is 12-2, taking on former champion Luke Rockhold, who is 16-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
This one was some craziness. Of course, we all know what happened. Whitaker pulled out of this fight, and Romero stepped in to take his place. Well, I believe a few sportsbooks out there didn't realize the difference between Whitaker and Romero, and they actually posted the number that was hanging there for Whitaker for Romero, and there was an error that a lot of places offshore everywhere copied, and that's why you see the line being so crazy. My efficient opener for this fight was actually sent out at -130 Romero, even money for Rockhold. And, you know, like I said, there was just glitches everywhere where if you guys don't know how the sportsbook market works, a lot of times, they hop on Don Best and they hop on different screens and they kind of follow each other. They, obviously, start posting lines that are available from other books, and sometimes that can cause a mess if one book is wrong. So I think that was the case here with the openers that are flying around at -180, -190 for Romero. That should have never opened that high, obviously. And right now, what you're seeing at BetDSI is actually -154. The comeback on Romero is at +124. So the line actually flipped for my opener of Romero -130 to, like I said, right now, DSI has -154. So action is coming in Rockhold's way, to say the least. With Romero taking this fight on short notice, we've all known that he has, in the past he's had some conditioning issues. I think that's coming into play here as well. And then the other factor is, even though Romero has that awesome, extensive, world-class wrestling background that we know is so legit, Rockhold is a freak on the ground. It doesn't matter who he's battling with on the ground, outside of Jacare, of course. He is a special elite grappler that he gets top position on you. It doesn't take much. Even if Rockhold can't hold Romero down, I think he could utilize his jiu-jitsu ability and his ground and pound. He could do some damage even if it's limited, and that might be enough to get him out of there. So Rockhold is just an elite special fighter on the ground. It's amazing. Even on the feet, you got to be cautious with Rockhold, especially his kicks. His liver kicks are spot on. He's definitely dangerous offensively. It's defensively where it's at with Rockhold that you have to be concerned a little bit about, because chin has obviously been tested. It's not going to get any better with age. That's the hard part to deal with when you're talking about Rockhold right now is, he has all the tools in the world to be the best middleweight out there. It's just that chin sometimes lets him down. And I've started to notice that his cardio at times hasn't been the best either. So there's some issues with Rockhold for sure. But that being said, he is training right now, obviously in Florida. He's getting a different look, of course, and I think he's working. It's good sometimes for fighters like this to have a change. And of course, we all know Rockhold's been with a great camp his whole career, AKA, but now he decided to switch camps a little bit or switch his training up a little bit. And I think it's going to do him some good. It'll kind of rejuvenate his career. His cardio probably will get a little bit better again as well. So there's some good things about Rockhold to like here, but stylistically, it could be a tough matchup for him because Romero, obviously, we all know what kind of powerhouse he can be on the feet. The guy has outstanding wrestling where he typically will be able to stuff people's takedowns and then utilize his strengths on the feet and do some damage. I mean, he's had some heck of a time winning some quality fights. Even that Whitaker fight was just a war, a 5-round close decision loss for him. I mean, he could be wearing that strap right now. So I think Romero's gotten better. Overall, his conditioning has improved as well. He's paced himself a little better. He's fighting smarter. But that being said, if you look at some of the scalps he has on his resume, I mean, he did get by Weidman. The Jacare Souza fight, that was interesting because a lot of people believe that he lost that fight because Souza was able to survive that fight. But that being said, he still got the W there. Of course, he knocked out Machida. I mean, Romero's been the type of guy that it doesn't take much. I mean, he's got such that special power. It doesn't take much. If he hits you with an elbow, hits you with his fist, whatever the case may be, a knee, he could put you out of there quick like. So I think Romero's going to need to stand up, keep this fight upright, sprawl, brawl, and do what he does best and try to catch that chin of Rockhold's and put him out. With all the action coming in Rockhold's way, at this point, I'm going to side with Romero. I think there's too many people are counting Romero out. Again, it could be a little bit of short notice. Stylistically, they might think it's a bad matchup, but I think Romero is going to be able to probably keep this fight upright. And if he does, he's going to get his opportunities to catch Rockhold's chin and possibly put him out. So if this fight goes deep, it definitely favors Rockhold, especially with a longer camp. And again, I think he's kind of rejuvenated his training right now too as well. So I'm expecting him to have the edge as the fight progresses even more so. Even though Romero's cardio has improved quite a bit, I still think that Rockhold as the fight progresses has a better chance to win as well. So it's interesting how this fight plays out. I think it's going to probably be Romero catching that chin of Rockhold and put him out there. So I'm going to pick Romero, go against the grain right now, and say that he gets the job done.
And I'm actually going to agree. I mean, there are several factors in this fight that you have to take into consideration. I mean, the short notice isn't a problem for me. I mean, Yoel Romero was expected to fight 2 weeks after this weekend against David Branch. So it's not like this is some crazy short notice thing. He was supposed to be fighting David Branch in a top contender battle. And instead, he got pulled from that fight and got moved up 2 weeks. So, I mean, he was already in training camp. He should be perfectly well prepared. So I don't think there'll be any excuses for this fight. Now, in terms of skill sets, I would say Romero is the more powerful striker. Romero is the more diverse striker. He's the more dangerous, explosive style striker. He's a little quicker. But Luke Rockhold has the technique on him. While Romero has the elite wrestling ability with being a silver medal winning, Olympic winning wrestler, his ground game has never really been his strongest suit. It's been that athleticism and power. Romero has actually been taken down multiple times in fights. Derek Brunson had some success taking him down. So, if anything, I would say the ground is his weakness in this fight. Luke Rockhold has one of the best ground games of any middleweight on the entire roster. He dominated a very strong ground fighter in David Branch. He dominated a very strong ground fighter in Chris Weidman. He dominated Lyoto Machida. So the last thing you want to have happen to you in a fight against Luke Rockhold is to find yourself on your back against him. And I could see Romero on his back against Rockhold. Rockhold has decent takedown ability, and he doesn't just have elite submission ability with his grappling. He also has very good ground and pound. I mean, he was able to he won the title by ground and pounding Chris Weidman. So for this fight, I think Rockhold is going to want to keep his distance on the feet, work his range with, cause he does have very long limbs for the middleweight division. He has pretty good kicking game and decent striking, and then set up opportunities to get this fight to the floor. Romero, on the other hand, is probably also going to want to keep his distance and then just set up opportunities to explode in and try to attack Rockhold's chin, because the biggest weakness Rockhold has is the chin. As dangerous and extremely talented as Rockhold is, I mean, that chin has failed him multiple times throughout his career. Obviously the Vitor Belfort knockout loss was a huge, thing for him, early when he debuted in the UFC. And then, Michael Bisping, the Miracle, was able to pull off the huge upset by just landing a perfectly timed, punch and rocking him and eventually knocking him out along the fence. So, and you know what? As dangerous as Vitor Belfort is, as, good of a punch as it was that Bisping landed, Yoel Romero is more powerful than both of those guys, potentially more than both of those guys combined. So if Romero lands something nasty, whether it be a flying knee, a spinning attack, a crazy back fist, or a Superman punch, I mean, Romero is capable of throwing anything at any time, at any place, and making it hurt. And if he does, I think Rockhold is in huge, huge trouble. So, with this being a 5-round fight, I think that I just don't know if Luke Rockhold can defend his chin well for 5 rounds. I mean, in his return bout against David Branch, not known as being a very strong striker, got in Rockhold's face and unloaded some combinations. So I think if Romero lands anything significant, he's going to win this fight. So that's why I'm going to side with him. Even though I do think Rockhold overall is the better fighter, the fact that Rockhold's chin is such a detriment here is going to play out. And I expect Romero to land something nasty and put him away and become the interim UFC middleweight champion and set up a rematch against Robert Whittaker. So my pick is going to be Yoel Romero. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 221. Our premium bets for the event will be released this Friday following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our new sponsor, BetDSI. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.